When talking about shooting, one of the first things that people want to know about guns is, how do I know what type of bullet to get for my gun? What type of ammunition is the proper one to use and best suited for my needs? There are so many out there. Well, we're going to talk about 3 different types of ammunition. There are 3 basic types of bullet designs. There's full metal jacket or ball rounds, there's hollow point, and there's frangible. So let's talk about what each one of these is and what their advantages and disadvantages are. The first type of ammunition is referred to as full metal jacket. It's also commonly referred to as ball rounds. Ball rounds have a very effective purpose in target shooting or competition type shooting. The thing that makes these so useful is that A, they're very cheap and inexpensive to purchase, and B, they do the job. They are meant to hit a target and go through it. Those are their advantages. The disadvantages to full metal jacket rounds comes when you think about using them for self-defense purposes. When using full metal jacket or ball rounds for self-defense purposes, what can happen is, say you missed your target, you had an attacker in your home and you went to shoot and you accidentally shot your wall. Well, it's not probably going to stop in the wall. It's probably going to continue through that wall, through another wall, possibly through another wall, possibly through your neighbor's house, into their walls. Because ball rounds are just that. They're a little ball of lead that tends to penetrate very heavily through objects or multiple objects. Since there's not a lot of expansion that goes on when they hit an object, they just continue to travel with their original inertia. The disadvantage to full metal jacket in self-defense is that they tend to penetrate very heavily and easily through objects. That means, for instance, if you had an attacker in your home and you were to shoot and hit your wall, it may go through your wall, through another wall, maybe through your neighbor's house, into their walls. These full metal jacket rounds penetrate heavily and continue to move because they don't have a lot of expansion when they hit an object. They have much of their initial inertia as they carry on through multiple objects. It can sometimes take several walls to slow down this type of round. The other disadvantage to using these ball rounds or full metal jacket in self-defense is just that. They tend to not expand. Therefore, when they enter an object or a person, they tend to go through with a very clean hole into one side and out the other, not creating quite the wound cavity that some people would hope for in trying to stop or slow down an attacker. Now with hollow points, these are often chosen for self-defense purposes. This is because while they're a little more expensive to purchase, they have a unique quality to them, and that is when they hit objects, they expand. Because they have a concave, hollowed out front, when they hit an object, it allows it to hit the object and expand outward. Therefore, when you have a ball round that is traveling into an object, it may travel through in kind of a straight little line and keep a clean little hole. When the hollow point hits, it's going to expand and cause a bigger hole coming through. This has 2 benefits in self-defense. First, it can greatly minimize the overpenetration of going through multiple walls. Therefore, where a full metal jacket round may go through multiple walls easily, a hollow point would typically start to slow significantly after the first wall and come to a stop maybe after a second wall or third wall, just depending on the circumstances. But regardless, it would greatly slow its inertia and ability to keep penetrating objects because it expands to such a great width. In fact, hollow points typically expand to just a little less than double their original diameter when shooting. Frangible rounds have a very unique advantage to them in that when they hit an object, what they do is they disintegrate into little pieces of shrapnel. So rather than having it hit an object and go through it, it disintegrates into tiny pieces of metal shrapnel fragments. Now, this can be good for shooting at steel targets, for example, because when shooting steel targets, if you were to shoot a full metal jacket round, you would have to worry about ricochet. Some of you may have seen YouTube videos of people that have shot at steel targets and had the round come back and hit them, and it can be a little bit scary. But when shooting frangible rounds, you can shoot steel targets at a very close proximity because, again, when it strikes an object, that round will disintegrate into multiple little pieces, making it very effective for steel target shooting. For a while, frangible rounds were considered all the rage in self-defense shooting because people were thinking, how great is this? This object will not over-penetrate walls, it'll disintegrate when it hits them, and when it goes into an attacker, it will go into tiny pieces of shrapnel, causing a good amount of damage and thus stopping ability. But the problem that has developed is people realize that when somebody wears heavy layers of clothing or multiple layers of clothing, sometimes as the frangible rounds were striking those objects, they were disintegrating prior to actually breaking through the skin as designed for self-defense. Therefore, frangible rounds typically are not used for self-defense anymore. Let's talk about what it means when we talk about the caliber of ammunition. Many people have heard the terms 40, 45, 38, 357, 44 Magnum, 22. There's all kinds of them out there. But what do these calibers really mean? Well, caliber is simply a measure of the diameter. The diameter of what? Well, sometimes people will tell you it's the diameter of the bullet. This could be an okay definition, but just so you now know, it's actually the measure of the diameter of the barrel that the bullet fits into. Thus, a little bit of a difference. Not much, but just a hair, and you now know this. So what is the caliber? Well, again, if you have a 45 caliber bullet, that is measured in 100ths of an inch. So a 45 caliber bullet is 0.45 inches in diameter, or the barrel that it shoots through rather is 0.45 inches in diameter. If you have a 40 caliber, that means it's 0.40 inches in diameter, the barrel that the bullet is going through. So what about 9mm? Well, it's simply on the metric system. Again, it's a measure of the diameter of the barrel. So that's all caliber really means, is that it's the measure of the diameter of the barrel that the bullet is going through. So what is the grain of a bullet? Have you heard this term, grain? Well, this term is one of the most often misapplied when it comes to ammunition. A lot of people talk about grain, but they don't actually understand what the grain is. There's all types of them out there. There's 165 grain, there's 120 grain, there's 180 grain, all these different grains. So what does it really mean? Well, grain is simply a weight measurement. 7,000 grains is approximately 1 pound. So grain is a weight measurement. So if you say you have a 165 grain bullet versus a 120 grain bullet, the 165 grain bullet is heavier than the 120 120 grain bullet. That's all it means. But you will see oftentimes people will talk about grain in terms of how much grain is inside, because often people think that grain is referring to the grains of primer or powder that has gone into making the casing for that bullet or that cartridge. But in fact, it's simply a measurement of the weight. So what does this weight mean? Well, if you have a heavier bullet, you have one that travels a little slower but has a little bit more impact mass when it hits. If you have a lighter bullet, it's going to fly a little bit faster, but it's going to have a little bit less impact mass when it hits its object. So how important is it to figure out what grain you're going to shoot? Well, there are differences in how the bullets respond when they hit objects depending on their grain and other characteristics of their makeup. But what we can tell you is this: from all the ballistic studies that we've seen, we've been involved in, we've conducted on our own, there are some differences, but nothing that is going to make a crucial difference for you as an average everyday shooter. Now, if you knew precisely how far your shot was going to be, what the temperature was going to be that day, what the elevation was going to be like, and how the wind would be functioning, as well as what the characteristics of your particular target would be, what type of material you would be hitting, then you can make an educated decision on what grain to use. This comes into play for snipers, for example, when they're taking a long shot. The grain of their bullet can be very crucial in the decision on how they make their shot. However, as an average shooter, you don't have control over these everyday factors, and you don't know what you're getting into. Therefore, it doesn't really make much difference which grain you choose for your particular shooting needs. So how do you know which ammunition properly fits your firearm? Well, we're going to teach you something called the 3 Bs that will help you to determine which ammunition is the proper caliber to place into your firearm. The first B is barrel. On the barrel of most every firearm, there is something that indicates what caliber that particular firearm takes. This particular one, I know you probably can't see it from back there, but it says 40 S&W, 40 S&W, or 40 Smith & Wesson. This takes a 40 Smith & Wesson round. The next one is the box. When you get a box of ammunition, if you look on it, it will tell you what caliber it is. Again, if you look at this particular one, it says 40 Smith & Wesson. So this is a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber round. Finally, there's the brass. The brass of the actual ammunition is also stamped to let you know what particular caliber it is. On the back of this one, it says 40 S&W. It actually says Winchester 40 S&W. So let's talk about what this means. This means that if you check the barrel of your firearm, you see what caliber it takes, then you know when you go to the store to purchase the ammunition, you're getting the proper ammunition. And if you, for some reason, had some ammunition laying around and you weren't sure of what kind it was, you know you could check the brass to see what caliber that ammunition is, ensuring that you put the proper ammunition into your firearm. Now this is crucial because some ammunition will fit into a firearm even though it's not designed to fire out of that firearm. So you have to be very careful about which ammunition you're putting into your weapon. The one exception to this is the .357 revolver. The .357 revolver is actually capable and designed to fire the .38 caliber round. Now the .38 caliber revolver is not designed to shoot the .357 caliber round in reverse. And you might say, oh no, that's so much to remember, I hope I never screw that up, I've got to take notes on this. Don't worry, you can't screw it up, it's impossible. The reason is The .357 revolver can accept a .38 caliber round because the .38 caliber round is shorter than the .357 caliber round. But if you try to place the .357 caliber into a .38 caliber revolver, it's simply too long, it won't fit, and you can never get that cylinder closed. So you can't mess that up. Now when we talked about getting the proper caliber for your firearm, you notice we were talking about the .40 Smith & Wesson round. This sometimes causes confusion to people because they go, well, .40 Smith & Wesson, does that mean that I can only shoot Smith & Wesson ammunition through that firearm? Or was this firearm made by Smith & Wesson? Or how does that all work? Well, we're going to tell you the secret right now. So .40 Smith & Wesson is the only .40 caliber round out there. So why is it called .40 Smith & Wesson? Well, it's simply a trademark put on there by Smith & Wesson because guess what? They designed the .40 caliber round. Therefore, it doesn't matter if you have the Winchester ammunition, Federal ammunition, Speer ammunition, whatever it may be, whatever particular brand ammunition you get, if you're getting the .40 caliber round, it is a .40 Smith & Wesson or .40 S&W round. So that is what the .40 caliber round is a .40 S&W. It's the same thing with the .45 ACP. A lot of people don't know what that really means, that ACP. Well, .45 ACP stands for 45 Auto Colt Pistol, because hey, guess who designed the .45 caliber round? Colt. So that's what that means when you see those names afterwards. It's just a trademark for developing that caliber ammunition. So the first thing we're going to talk about is rimfire. Rimfire ammunition means that the rim is where all of the primer is located. Therefore, in order to activate the bullet out of that cartridge, what needs to happen is the rim needs to get pinched by the shooting mechanism inside of the firearm. So it gets pinched on the rim, meaning that's what detonates the primer, causing the explosion to happen. So rimfire has all of the primer rather, in the rim of that cartridge. Centerfire has all of the primer in a primer cap area of the cartridge, and it's located right in the center of the back of the round. And in there is where the primer is located. There is where the firing pin must strike in order to activate that cartridge. With rimfire, there is only one modern caliber ammunition that is made in rimfire, and that is the .22. And .22 is only made in rimfire, so those two words have kind of become synonymous with one another. If you say rimfire, people know that you're talking about a .22. If you say .22, people know that you're talking about a rimfire cartridge. Virtually every other modern manufactured cartridge is made in a center fire round. Therefore, pretty much everything you deal with is going to be center fire unless you're shooting a .22. Now, one problem that comes up with these .22 caliber rounds is that the primer is all on the rim. Therefore, if they get set on their sides during storage or shipping, and they sit there for any length of time, the primer can sometimes gravitate down towards the bottom side of the rim. So when you stand that cartridge up, you don't know which side some of that primer may have moved to. Therefore, it's not uncommon to have a misfire with a .22 caliber cartridge. It's not a bad thing. It's not that it's a problem with the manufacturing. It's just that that's the nature of it, and sometimes there are going to be misfires. Because what will happen is you'll load it into your firearm, and when the firing pin squeezes down on the rim, it'll hit an area on there that didn't have any primer in it. And so you'll get a big click. So if you eject that round, reload it in there, and shoot it out, oftentimes you get the bang that you were anticipating, and everything goes smooth from there. But because of this problem with the primer in .22s, we strongly suggest that if at all possible, you use a different caliber for self-defense. A lot of people will tell you don't use .22s for self-defense because they're so small and they're ineffective. Well, a well-placed shot is a well-placed shot, and it can have just as much effect out of a .22 as it could out of a 9 if it was put in the right spot. But the problem again is that they can sometimes be unreliable rounds, and you don't want to trust your self-defense needs to an unreliable round.